Welcome back to the Diary of a CMO, the podcast where I sit with CMOs and thought leaders in marketing and related media, tech, and creative industries. We'll talk about how they got to where they are, strategies and life lessons we can learn from them to help build a career, business, and ultimately a life that we love. I hope you enjoy, and please subscribe. Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining me on this episode of the Diary of a CMO. It's always a pleasure to welcome my guests on the episode. This one is pretty personal for me, and I'll explain why. It's because in my short career within advertising and broader marketing communications industry, I spent the most amount of my time working on spirit brands and that broader category. So I think I worked on more Hennessy brands for I'd say about 8 years, and also worked on Pernod-Ricard brands for another like 4 or 5 years ish. So this is like coming home for me with the guest I have today. On the podcast with me today, it's a unique pleasure to welcome Nthabi Motsoeneng. I got that right.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Oh my
Welcome.
God. Oh, thank you very much. And Tabby is the CMO for Pernod Ricard, Middle East and Africa. I'm going to let Ntabi do her intro myself, but I think I wanted to say off right out the gate that, it's a real pleasure to have you on. I'm excited about some of the conversations we're going to have today, and I can't wait to get into it. So, for people who are meeting you for the first time, Tabby, how would you introduce yourself, capturing that sort of professional background, career where you are, and all of that stuff?
Cool. Nthabi Motsoeneng. I am a marketer who's been around the block, had some, hard knocks, learned from some of the best brands, some of the biggest brands, and some of the smallest brands in the industry, and it's culminated into me being in the role that I'm in, which is a very privileged role as Chief Marketing Officer for Africa and the Middle East. Privileged because I get to work with amazing people. We spread conviviality, and it's spreading conviviality in a region that's quite complex and unique. And the privilege for me is the opportunity to get to experience the many different flavors, perspectives
Right.
of how people, get together, socialize, and how people connect with each other, which is really what's at the center of what we do. So,
Interesting.
yeah, and I don't do this alone. I have an amazing team of people who are way smarter than me.
I can imagine. I can imagine. Thank you very much for that intro, Tabby. I was curious, when you talked about spreading conviviality and thinking about the complexity
Mm,
of, the region as a whole, or both regions. I remember I was in a workshop with the team at Pernod Ricard. I think this was
mm,
2019 or so in Lagos, Nigeria, of course. And the team, we had Bahrain, Jankovic, Bisan
yeah.
in the room as well, and some of the guys in the Nigerian markets and some guys from the region too. And I remember that we were trying to, and the main task was how do we interpret, and this was for the Martell brand, by the way, how do we
Mm,
interpret audacity, in the Nigerian market? Because we figured like there is
mm,
the nomenclature of it, there's the grammatical interpretation of it, but then from a cultural standpoint, how do you contextualize that across regions? And I think
mm.
that speaks to the point you were making about complexity, is that whatever this brand promise is across all of your portfolio of brands, I can't imagine the task of trying to interpret that brand promise across multiple markets. And I'm just curious, like how do you get to do that?
Yeah, I think you know what it's approaching things with an open and authentic approach,
Interesting.
right? Open in that be open to seeing the different ways in which the brand
Right.
could find that sweet spot that through which it connects with consumers.
Right.
Whether
Right.
it's a beautiful creative tension
Hmm.
between what the brand offers and what consumers are looking for in
Right.
their world.
Right.
So, and that's the openness and the authenticity is being mindful and just respectful of not coming at from a point of view of preaching, where the brand is telling consumers
Right.
how,
Right.
because we consume, it's amazing how people consume brands differently to what they're intended to, how
Right.
they're intended to be consumers. And that gives you some really interesting clues into what is really the undercurrents of what drives how people connect or how people engage with your brands. And that's why I say it's openness and authenticity, and also the humility
Mm,
to extend yourself beyond what you are trying to achieve. Because
interesting.
oftentimes it's what we need to get right about the
Right.
brand.
Right.
We need to
Right. Right.
what about where consumers are at? Because consumers
Right.
have choice and they have the power to say, actually, no, not your brand, rather the other brand. And the other brand may have been one that's actually taken the time to care to understand.
Interesting. Interesting. I completely agree. Some keywords there: openness, authenticity, and also the humility. I think the humility is a big one, especially for, like,
Mm.
forgive me for lack of a better word, big name brands. It's almost like if we
Yeah.
built it, then they should show up. It's like this hubris, you know. It's like this
Yeah.
hubris, that if we did it, they should show up. And I think I like that you capped it with the point about humility in terms of stepping away from what we want to achieve as a brand. What does the customer want? What does the consumer want? And I think that's really, really instructive, very instructive. I was going to ask you though, um, how? I mean, I was looking at your LinkedIn profile and it reads that you've been a marketing director for about 4 years. And I'm just curious, coming into this role, did you kind of always know that, listen, this is the path I want to take and this is where I'm going? How did you get into marketing and by extension, sort of rise to where you are today?
Um, how I got into marketing in terms of where my career started was actually, that was never the intention to get into marketing, right?
Wow.
I had big dreams of studying international relations and law. I was
Wow.
doing history and political science in school, and I
Hmm.
had these big dreams. And I always laugh sometimes when I think back to the little girl, when you had to write stories for the school magazine. I'm like, I'm the first female black president of this country.
Oh my days.
Um, Reality sets in, right? Growing up, and I had an opportunity to get a bursary from, interestingly enough, the back then South African breweries.
Interesting.
And it was made very clear it's either if you want the bursary, for which I'd been chosen because of series of batteries of psychometric assessments that they'd done when they were looking for young talent that they could groom from high school, all the way from high school, and then at the end of high school, once you decide what you want to study. So for them to pay for my studies, high school, no issues, bright
Right.
young talent. But when it got to making choices about university, I had to think differently about that, right?
Right.
Because it's either I go study something that someone's going to pay for, and eventually at the end of this, I'll have employment, or I, follow the dream, follow the passion. And I must say, I ended up going with the more practical choice because
Interesting.
also parents having put one through really great schools and still
Right.
having other siblings, it was starting to become difficult, and the challenge and the daunting thought
Right.
of
Right.
university tuition.
Right.
I just thought, let's be practical here. And in any
Right.
case, I enjoy the kind of themes that I would have to deal with in marketing. And I
Right.
guess for me then, for my career, that's in essence how I've always driven my career. It's about, I've always looked for roles that were aligned with things that I was passionate about, things I found of interest, or
Interesting.
things about myself that I still wanted to stress test. It wasn't always a case of straight line to the very top. This
Hmm.
is, the trajectory. And it's because I've always lived life with this openness to the adventure. Like I
Mm.
always say to people, I'm all about drinking all the way to the last drop of, the juice of life, whatever it
Right.
might be, whatever your juice of life is.
Right.
And I want to feel like I've really experienced things for what they really were, that I felt, touched, tasted, and cried, and and grew from it. So I
Mm.
was always looking for those sorts of experiences where I can stress test, and discover, the fun of discovering what else
Right.
one is made up of. And I get,
Right.
and then later on, yes, in my career, one started having to be very clear. Okay,
Mm.
it's this job title, but I'm loving the way human and let's just say adult development is going.
Right.
It's more what the current narrative is asking for is do exactly that. It's about
Mm.
what interests you, what are your skills, and
Right.
what still
Right.
scares you, and
Right.
seek that.
Interesting. Interesting. I think, the point you made about having sort of this sort of diverse experiences across multiple facets of life, and just like drawing on every last juice that life has to offer, is an interesting point, because I had a conversation with Ku Govender, that's the Publicis
Mm.
Africa CEO, and she said something similar, because I had asked her a question regarding what would you say to 15-year-old Ku, and what she said was, I would say to her, live life, make more mistakes. Do not allow the fear of failing at something cripple you from even trying it in the first place. Try many things, make many mistakes, and so on and so forth. And I think that resonates in some level as well to the point you just made. Um, you have a thing for equations, as a form of Yeah, I mean, you have a thing for equations as a form of expressing your thoughts. And that's interesting for me, because my default way of thinking is almost like systems thinking. It's so bad that even in a casual conversation with my wife, where we are having to make a decision about something, as she's talking, this is very funny, because in the early days of our marriage, yeah, when she starts talking, I'm writing down, I'm kind of taking notes on my phone, you know,
Yeah.
and then
Oh
she's
my
like,
word.
what are you doing? And I'm saying, no, babe, I'm just trying to capture my thoughts, and just so that when you're done, but I can hear you, I'm listening. And that's
Oh my
funny, because obviously after some time she kind of got used to it. I stopped taking notes literally, and just kind of captured those thoughts in the form of like 3 or 4 bullet points. So I find it very fascinating. I'm a very big advocate for thinking in systems or in frameworks or things like that. So seeing your format of expression of some basic concept in equations just got me very fascinated. And the one I want to pick on is, you had
yeah.
written, humility and value of learning and unlearning equals becoming better versions of ourselves. I had to write that down. Humility and value of learning and unlearning equals becoming better versions of ourselves. For those of us who don't understand that much grammar, can you kind of break it down for us? What thought you were trying to share there, and where this thing with equations actually come from?
I didn't realize I actually, do that. But when someone puts it at their feet, I suppose, you know what? I do that, only I don't sit there literally, putting it in
Right, right,
the front of the person. But there's definitely a visual that carries on in one's head, where you're putting things into blocks and you're trying to connect things, and especially things that are unconnected. I love the magic of things that are unconnected.
wow,
That's where it comes from. I think it's
right,
it's 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 the beauty of things that would seemingly on the surface look like they are diametrically opposed. When you put them together,
right,
what that
right.
can generate. And this piece on humility and the value of learning and unlearning, equating to us, or one becoming a better version of themselves. I think for me, it's a way of constantly reminding myself that I'm a work in progress,
Right,
and it's okay to not know everything,
right,
and to say when you don't know.
right.
And it's in doing that that you actually, are able to learn more,
Mm,
cover off whatever gap you may think you have, but also you give yourself an opportunity to just listen
hmm.
without any judgment. And the humility for me is a very big and important piece, because to grow and become a better version of yourself, you need to, at times, not just at times, but you need to yield
Right.
to the lessons that come, with the ebbs and flows of
Right.
one's life experiences. That
Right.
whatever season you're in, whether it's a season, and it's a season of growth, or it's a season of just being humbled.
Right. Right.
Humility is just yielding, letting it happen, and
Right.
walking through it, and
Right.
realizing that actually I I was a lot stronger than I thought
Right.
I was. I had a lot
Right.
more within me, and I
Mm.
actually handled a lot more than I expected. So, and the thing around learning and unlearning, it's this thing of constantly hacking one's own system,
Right.
and allowing others to also have an impact
Mhm.
on how you unhack and how you get better and improve. Because you don't get better and improve just doing, solo inwardly looking work.
Right.
It
Absolutely.
needs to have some kind of interaction, and with others, because that's
Right.
the beauty of what human relationships are about, right?
Mhm.
The
Mhm.
reflection of ourselves in some or other
Right.
way. You'll
Right.
times when people, sometimes the reason you might not like a certain person is because they represent something within yourself that you're
Right.
maybe judgmental about, or that
Right.
you have yet to hack and really, work on.
Right, absolutely. I completely agree with that concept. I want to take it back to what I've written here as the diary of a little African girl who wanted to become the first president of. Yeah, I'm just going on and on here. I
Love
just want
it.
to take it a step back and ask about what was. I assume you grew up in South Africa, and
Yes.
what was growing up like, and what were some of the sort of life events that you think to a large extent, influenced and formed the woman that you have become?
Yeah, I think I grew up at a wonderful and interesting time in our country as well, because
Interesting.
um, the firstborn, daughter of a nurse, and my dad was in sales rep. Interestingly enough, he worked in liquor, so
Oh
not saying
wow!
that
Oh,
there's
can you imagine that? Can you imagine that?
this part was usually quite interesting, because I remember times when, so in terms of television and the options that we had available,
Right.
obviously we had, what they called, Mnet, today's
Mhm.
DSTV, and it was quite a privilege having that, because there's so much more that you could watch. But one of the things, fondest memories I have in relation to my dad and his career, and
Right.
where industry he was working in, is watching boxing matches at three
Wow.
or 4 o'clock in the morning,
Wow.
waking up to make tea or coffee for my dad's buddies, who were
Wow.
also
Wow.
in liquor and the cigarette companies.
Oh
And I
my
used to get
goodness.
such a thrill out of this. They'd arrive, and I would have made, coffee or tea for them, and each of them would start off with that cup of coffee or tea, and as soon as the match started, they would then switch to what they really came there for. And and I'd be sitting there as this little girl amongst all of these, men watching boxing with them,
Mm,
and grew to appreciate the sport. And I remember my dad's favorite was, Evander Holyfield. And it
interesting.
was back then, at the peak of his career. So those are some of the memories that I'm
Wow.
fond of. And they used to come home with a lot of merch, because they all worked in different parts of the industry. I just
Right.
thought, oh, this is so cool, the stuff that I get to, have and
Wow.
keep in the house. And I felt like I was part of some kind of club with my dad and his buddies.
Oh man, that sounds very exciting. To the point you're making about boxing, I also remember having to watch boxing matches with my dad actually. That I think was his favorite sport. I think, yeah, it was. So would sit down, get you to sit down, watch, and all of that. So it's very, very interesting when we have these moments to kind of think about that childhood and things that we really enjoyed
Yeah.
growing up. I wanted to speak on, speaking about liquor, and a good segue into sort of like policy making and governance for
Mm,
marketing and advertising, broadly
mm.
speaking. I know that you're a board member. You're a board member at the Advertising Regulatory Board, and I'm
Yeah,
just
that's good.
curious. I'm just curious from your perspective. How do you
Mm,
think that policy making and governing bodies or whatever? How can we better collaborate with brands and advertisers and practitioners and all of that stuff to really
mm,
foster a more cohesive industry? Because and that question is so relevant, especially for the at least for the
mm,
Nigerian market. From what I know, is that it's one of the areas where Nigeria is currently kind of struggling. I mean, there's a few initiatives here and there to try to find a meeting point
yeah,
for things to work better. But I just wanted to get your perspective,
mm.
having been a part of these kinds of institution. Like, how can that be better executed?
Mm. I think, obviously establishing clear guidelines, but also for government to continue to promote industries to self regulate, because the industries themselves are best positioned to really be able to be honest about when things go wrong, this is how wrong they could get. And
Right,
when we all take a responsible stance and we do
right,
the right thing the first time around,
mm,
here's how well things could operate, and
right,
the benefit that consumers are able to get
right,
with responsible advertising, responsible marketing,
right.
that also just the self-regulation continue to promote that,
Got it,
and
got it.
continue to keep the dialogue open, the lines,
Interesting.
open lines of dialogue to learn and challenge, and the challenge through data as well,
Mm,
and not just make decisions on controversy, or on wherever the prevailing narrative might be going. Let's make sure that we are using fact-based instruments to be
yep.
able to make the right decisions.
Interesting. And I think the point you made about data, especially for government, which typically is not
Mm,
the approach. It's almost like it's on a whim. Someone decides to do something, but I think the point you made about data, and again, keeping that line of
mm,
communication open so that, this constant feedback loop can really, really help
yeah.
fine tune whatever policies or anything that the government might be working on. Speaking about government and also like you having the privilege of working across multiple markets on the continent and in the different region as well. What are some of the peculiarities of that? Especially if you had to you're overseeing marketing in a region like Kenya when there's a lot of tension some weeks ago and even up until recently, and also overseeing brands in
Mm,
regions where are experiencing reasonable, peace and all of that stuff. And then you go to another region where
mm.
it almost appears like they live in a bubble and everything seems to be working and all of that stuff. Like, how do you navigate that with your role?
I think it's with I go back to what I was saying, earlier about um, an open and humble approach, and understanding the context,
Right, right,
and not necessarily coming with your own preconceived notions, because
right,
context, as one of my team likes to put it, she always used to say, context is king.
right,
Once you know why,
right.
it's easier to be able to have the dialogue to navigate
Mm,
making decisions, and making decisions with respect to interested parties and what's at stake.
right,
I firmly believe it's the openness, having an open mind to things, and also humility.
right, right. I think the principles remain the same just based off the conversations we
Mm,
had earlier, right? That openness, that
mm,
authenticity, that humility, and all of that stuff. I think it still cuts through to this conversation as well. um, I I want to ask about personally, what are your biggest influences? When you think about Nthabi as a person, what are your biggest influences? And the reason I ask these kinds of questions is because of the younger audience that I have. I mean, obviously, it's a broad spectrum of people who listen to this from the sea level all the way down. Um, but it's always refreshing to get a perspective of someone who has walked that path if you get what I mean. To kind of see what nuggets you can extract from their own story. So when you look at your journey and you as a person professionally, what would you say are your biggest influences?
Biggest influences, I would say, the for me, I'm really inspired by, the triumph of the human spirit.
Mm.
I'm that underdog person. I'm that person that's always, not necessarily going to look to the obvious, because there's a lot of lessons to be learned from, people who may not necessarily be in a position where
Right,
things are easy for them.
right.
And that's what I call a triumph of the human spirit.
Interesting.
I am inspired by that, where a person has struggled to be able to get to where they are, or a person has gotten to where they are, despite the odds being against them. And
Wow.
because that's how I believe you're able to unhack yourself, and you constantly become better, and you never get comfortable,
Right.
because the risk is, hang on a sec, look where I come from,
Mm.
look what I've had to go through. So those are the kinds of things that inspire me, and people that I look up to,
Right.
who've done things that others would never have expected of
Wow.
someone that looks like you, speaks like you.
Right.
And that for me is beautiful, because then it means the world is able to really benefit
Mm.
from your story, your journey. But
Right.
not only that, the world is a better place for
Right.
you having been true to who you are,
Right.
and not trying to, hide it, and actually, and not trying to hide the fact that it's not easy,
Mm.
trying to be a better version of yourself. We
Mm.
get it, wrong all the time, and it's so easy with what we see on, social media, the kind of
Exactly. Exactly.
perfect curated images that people
Exactly.
paint for, the next generation to think life has always been like that for that person.
Right. Right.
Whereas when they unpack it, they realize, wow, actually, this person is like me. This is my story.
Right.
And for me, the biggest influence was, I guess, a moment in my life that where I had to grow up was, when I was in high school, having to make this the decision of what to study. It was a time
Right.
when my parents were going through financial struggles.
Right.
And you know what
Right.
it's like when you're a child, you're shielded, you're thinking, mom and dad are heroes, we are
Yeah.
this, we're that.
Yeah.
Then
Yeah.
life
Yeah.
happening. And
Yeah.
then, but in life, dealing one those blows, the way my parents were navigating it, my
Mm.
mom is my biggest influence,
Right.
because how she finds ways to teach lessons in the things that she's going through, and how um, they almost like it's lessons for
Right.
one day, should you go through this,
Right.
this is, how to navigate it, and
Right.
how she navigated it. But her spirit, it was that, indomitable spirit of, we will get over this. But
Mm.
whilst we're in this, we will not walk with our, you will not allow it to consume you.
Right.
You will keep hope alive, and you will do everything you can
Mm.
to work yourself back from where you are. And that's why the value of that very big milestone or life
Right.
event taught
Right.
me that life will always, go through,
Right.
I like to
Right.
call them the ebbs and flows.
Right.
And that's what's made it easier for
Right.
me to navigate those whenever those have come my way.
Wow, that's incredible, and I appreciate you being vulnerable to talk about some of these things. I had a similar conversation as well. I think it was with Don Rowlands, and
Mm,
it was when it was Don spoke about the fact that she had once taken up a job as a waitress,
mm,
and
mm,
to come from that to where she is now, and these are, I mean, these kinds of stories, these kinds of vulnerability, these kinds of conversations. I'm telling you, Nthabi, this is why I love doing the Diary of a CMO. because as you rightly said, we live in a world today where everything is perfect. I'm doing air quotes here. So it's always refreshing when we get the opportunity to hear these kinds of stories from people like you who have made significant progress and success with their career, to say, yo, listen, this is where I'm coming from, and I think that context definitely helps. Speaking about family, how important do you think that the family institution is?
Me, extremely important, because when there's nothing else, family will always be there.
Right,
It's what grounds me. Family and faith.
right,
Those are the things that ground me. The
right.
jobs will come and go,
Mm,
but without them, family is that's the one thing that will keep you going. And family is what helps you get through some of the tough times. And
absolutely.
also, family are the first to celebrate with you and remind you, gosh, do you remember when you didn't think you would get over this?
Right.
Remember that this thing that you're complaining about today, you once prayed for this, you
Mm,
once
mm,
wanted this. So
right.
stop being ungrateful. They'll keep you in
Wow.
check. And
Wow.
I think family is still important. And family need not have take on a traditional, sense of it's mom and dad in the same
Right.
household.
Right.
Family, it's those people who, will take you in,
Right.
embrace you, and who are there to cover your shame. We're
Mm,
also there to celebrate with you, but we're also there to just be like, I'm here when you need
mm,
me. That for me is family, because not everyone would have grown up and I'm just being mindful of that. And I've seen
absolutely.
people who may not have had the biological or the typical family structure,
Right.
but
Right.
had people, whether it was uncles or neighbors, who
Right.
took an interest in them
Right.
and became, family.
Interesting. Oh, wow. I mean, I could stop this podcast right here. It's just that I have a few other questions to go. I think, I think that, again, at the risk of sounding of being redundant now, is I think that these conversations about being grounded, about family, about faith, about what truly matters, these conversations
Mm.
need to take more center stage, from time to time,
Yes.
just as a
Yes.
firm reminder of the things that truly matter beyond
Yeah.
obviously trying to put food on the table and all of that stuff. So I really
Mm.
do appreciate having this conversation. So let's tone it down a bit because it's getting really deep
Sure.
now.
Yeah.
At the start of the conversation, at the start of our conversation, I talked about, you being that kind of person that really wants to extract the most from life, in terms of having, very rich and meaningful experiences. What are some of those things if Nthabi is not working on some of the biggest, brands in the world? What is she doing to wind down? How is she relaxing? Is it travel? Is it wine, as the case was for, I think it was Dawn or someone else who spoke about wine. I think it's a thing for South Africans and wine. We're not going to get into stereotypes. Let's leave that aside. But
Sure.
what are those things for you, Tabby?
Um, for me, and please don't laugh. My friends always say, please don't ever mention things like this in public. But I'm like, I like learning things, right? And I love being engaged in things that will teach me a new skill or a new craft.
Right.
So I love gardening. Gardening is a passion, one of my passions.
Wow.
The ability to create life, to be patient, nurture it from seed, nurture something from seed, watching it as a tiny plant, and then one day it produces fruit for you, which has happened lots of times. And I discovered I actually have green fingers, which I
Wow.
loved, I started it as a hobby just to help relax.
Mm,
The other thing I like doing, yes, I love to travel, all of those things, but
mhm.
if there's no travel and it's just me in this space,
Right.
I like to keep myself occupied because I'm a bit of a busy body. Mind is always going here, there, everywhere. And sometimes it's good to just slow things down. And so I enjoy knitting and crocheting. These are things we learned in school.
Right.
But
Interesting.
I found myself picking up knitting needles and, a crochet needle and yarn, and it's gotten out of hand to the extent where my husband is like, no, that is just way too much. Every weekend, I've got some, I'm bringing all. No, this is, you don't understand. This is mohair. This is cotton. What I'm going to make with this. Uh, do I make stuff? Yes, I
Oh my
do, because my
days.
husband keeps me in check.
Mm,
And but I also, because I enjoy making these beautiful creations, whether it's a blanket or
right.
a cardigan or a poncho. That now I start to get orders from people, and I find it very therapeutic. And every time I knit, it reminds me of a story I read about. I can't for the life of me remember this woman's name, but she was in IT and she was teaching coding to young kids from where she grew up
Right.
who had no clue what coding was. And she was like, well, I don't have, the equipment to do that. And well, what better way to, what is coding all about? It's patterns, it's equations, and those equations will create a certain pattern, right?
Right.
And what she started doing then is picked up a set of knitting needles and said, well, they can get knitting needles. I'm going to teach them all about coding through knitting. And I thought, what? Who would have thought?
Ah,
Yes,
wow.
there's a certain equation. If you knit the stitches, so many stitches in this manner and reverse, it'll give you, it'll produce something different, a different pattern.
Wow.
And yeah, every time I'm knitting, I'm like, wow, someone somewhere out there knows how to code because someone taught them how to do this.
Wow.
So it's one of my favorite things because of the beautiful creations I'm able to make. One thing you don't do is disturb me when I'm counting stitches, which my husband thinks is the funniest thing to do. I'll be like, and then he was like 27, and I'm like, do that. What did you do today? I'm like, no, 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 wait.
Not now, not right
Yeah,
now, not now.
not right now. No, when I'm counting stitches. Worst thing you can do to a knit.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Oh man, that's incredible. I promise you, I didn't see that coming when you were going to talk about your
Yeah.
hobbies. I didn't see knitting coming. Absolutely not. I didn't. I
And
must
the other
confess.
one is linked to creativity is art. I consume art like I consume family sweets, which is
Wow.
another thing my husband is also constantly going, whoa, just curb the enthusiasm there. I love art in all its forms. And I think African artists are doing the most amazing things,
Interesting.
some of the most beautiful creations. One
Mm,
artist that I'm obsessed with, and it's because of the theme that she deals with, is Lebohang, and she calls herself Lebohang Ilan on Insta.
yeah.
And she used to be a hairdresser, and
Okay.
she's taken that art, that skill,
Actually, I've seen
and
that. I've seen that. I've seen that. I saw that. I saw that. I saw that. Yeah, I did.
yeah, maybe.
Oh man, it's
So she
incredible.
captures the essence of who we are, what
Yeah.
hair represents us.
Yeah, 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 yeah. It's incredible. I think I was reading up on her, and then there's this article about how when she was talking about the patterns with the hairstyles and how they were like
Mm,
a medium for communication.
yes.
As
Oh, yes.
it's incredible. It's just an incredible story, really an incredible story, and I can see how that can be very
Mm,
fascinating for sure. Wow. So it's like a whole it's a very broad spectrum for you in Tavi. Like
mm,
when I think about like all of these, different hobbies. But I guess that's the point that you were making earlier
mm,
about how experiencing life in multiple ways, in
mm,
multiple forms, and extracting the best of experiences that you possibly could from them. And I think that just lands well as you talk about this range of hobbies that you have. Um I was gonna ask you about, building premium brands,
mm,
and just for my education, hopefully someone out there benefits from this, like I always say about the podcast. Just for my education,
mm.
what is your playbook when you think about building premium brands? What is your playbook?
Me, I guess it's there's the usual, construct of how you build a brand, right?
Right.
And
Right.
what the end output is, which
Right.
is your brand needs to be meaningful.
Mm.
It needs to be unique. It needs to be known. That's
Right.
that's the standard.
Right.
But building, premium brands, and especially in the context of very diverse markets,
Right.
regions,
Right.
like the one that
Right.
may happen to work in, it's you need to understand and embrace the cultural nuances,
Mm.
and you need to connect in a real, or how do we put it, in an authentic way,
Right.
and make sure that your preconceived notions
Mm.
about how your brand is supposed to play out,
Right.
that you are open to how consumers may take your brand and decide for themselves how it's, going to be, how they are experiencing it. The
Mm.
trick is, and I'm not saying completely leave it to consumers to decide what your brand positioning or any of that stuff should be.
Right.
For me, the real value is in understanding why they would want to engage and connect with your brand in that way. And that's where you
Right.
really start to break through and are able to connect in a
Right.
way that has cultural relevance, but that is also real and
Absolutely.
rooted in something of substance, where consumers can say, like I was saying about Lewahang's work, she gets us.
Right.
I connect with her
Right.
work. And
Right.
that's why first piece of hers, I was able to just buy. It was like that. I see myself in that. I see my story.
Right.
And also ensuring that you the basic construct of craft and quality around your brand,
Right.
that it's not just a thing that's there, and it's steeped rich in heritage and all of that stuff, but that you're extracting the most value out of that
Right.
through storytelling in a way that's meaningful, and using storytellers, that local storytellers, that
Right.
help to show how your brand may play out and may come to life in their real and lived experience.
Right.
I think for me, those are the important things. It's connecting in a way that is that shows that you understand and embrace the cultural nuances, and truly, truly connect at a very real level.
Right.
And yeah, with respect to what the culture is, but also understand that your brand cannot come with a very egotistical view.
Right.
And this
Right.
was one of the things that I've always had this view, and it can be quite conflicting when you speak with any other market out there, to say, but what do you mean? The brand's ego. For me, it was affirmed during my journey on the canned, jury in the canned jury room, where I was seeing this very fresh thing that was happening with a lot of brands, and I termed it egoless brands as
Mm.
a theme that I was picking, because they asked us pick out, themes. And obviously someone went and put it in a much better way, which is brands, without ego,
Right.
where brands are able to go, I can also be human,
Right.
showing a human side.
Right.
Let's play how you would, prefer to incorporate me into your world. Because at the
Right.
end of the day, the fundamental basics of what the brand values are, if that's intact, that's usually what consumers will connect with, right?
Right.
Because, hey, I'm that kind of person and this is what's important to me. Hey, that brand seems to represent that.
Right.
So removing the ego from the brands and giving the brands a human, giving your brands a human face or a human feel to
Right.
them.
Right. I think that I think the peculiarity with, and this is me trying to double down on this question, is
Mm,
um it appears like with premium brands, it's a bit more difficult to
mm,
um it's a bit more difficult to find what's meaningful for the audience
mm.
and still situates the brand in that premium space. Do you get what I mean? Like, it almost feels like
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
a bit, sometimes can get challenging, because in an attempt to be meaningful to the audience, we also don't want to lose this premiumness
The
of the brand, and
mm,
how would you how do you typically navigate that, because again, it's a real challenge that, I mean, and this is me speaking personally,
mm.
it's a real challenge that
Yeah.
I've also had to deal with in terms of working with some of these brands. How would you navigate this, preserving the premium positioning of the brand, while
Mm.
trying to, connect on that human and meaningful level with the audience? Not to suggest that, a premium audience has no soul, and you can find something that matters to them, But it's just, you get what I mean. What's your take?
Yeah, I think it's in exactly what you've just said. Understanding what matters to your consumers, right?
Right.
Because what you want to get to is where is that tension point, that exists. What's the tension that exists between where consumers are at and what the brand, where they're at versus where they want to be,
Mm,
and what does my brand represent? Is it representing things that they want and aspire to? Because
right.
it's that cultural tension, whether it's a premium brand or not, but
Right.
even more so when it's a premium brand. What
Mm,
is that
mm,
cultural tension that my brand has the right, and yeah, it has the right to be able to play in there in a way
right.
that is also not pretentious, that doesn't feel like I've
Right.
just tried to attach myself to
Absolutely.
this,
Absolutely.
which we are right.
Mm,
That is indeed the risk and the danger when it comes to these brands that seem to be very aspirational, etc. But at the end of the day, also remember premium consumers, whether we want to call them that, premium prestige,
yeah.
are also the kind of consumers who are looking for things that have a lot more meaning,
Right.
to them than
Right.
just the sugar coating, the
Right.
ice.
Right.
It's people who have who are driven by the sense of journeying and discovering and experimenting. That's why I say when promoting premium brands, be try and find what is the story of your brand and where's the craft
Right.
in that.
Right.
It's
Right.
consumers who are very discerning on looking
Right.
for that. The story of, ooh, what is it about this bag?
Right.
I love the trimming, the stitching. So
Right.
it's the
Right.
craftsmanship of how it's
Right.
made. And
Right.
why that's important to me because it
Right.
says, someone's thought through this. And I love how it's always different. It'll
Right.
always have a twist
Right.
because that's the kind of person I am,
Right.
as an example, in connecting with the brands. It's a difficult one.
Yeah.
We don't always get it right.
Right.
But when you do, you've got long, term value
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
way into the future.
Yeah. I must say that, speaking about getting it right, the Jameson brand in the Nigerian market is a go-to case study for me.
Yeah.
Again, not just because I got the opportunity to work with the team, but just in terms of how how the investment in building the brand the right way, translated into real business outcomes. And I remember, because I'd read some of the financial reports, and I saw, it was triple digit growth rates in volume and in value in the Nigerian market. I think this was
Mhm.
between 2018 or 2019, 2020, 2020. It was really crazy,
Mhm.
that sort of, the way the brand took off. And today, it's a household name. Like, I mean, I have, a bottle sitting somewhere. A Black Barrel is what I prefer. um so it's one of those case studies I go to when I think about this concept of really building brands the right way, ultimately translating into real business outcomes. And I
Mhm.
always love to talk about it, and shout out the team, Lanre, Sib, Bahrain, and the rest of the guys.
Yeah,
It was
indeed.
really, really great work. It was really great work. Wow, thank you so much, Nthabi. Oh my goodness, I can't believe we've done what? This is what, 48 minutes. I did.
Jesus.
I'm
Oh, you keep
I'm
it counting.
I'm telling you. I'm telling you. But again, I like when the time creeps up on me like this. It only means that, we have had a meaningful conversation so
Mm,
far that
dear.
I'm not really looking at time or whatever. My final question as we start to round up
Mm.
is, um, what would you say to 15-year-old Nthabi?
Mm. What I would say to her is, um, dare to dream and
Mm,
live life in technicolor.
wow.
Play with all the colors. Live
Wow.
life in technicolor, because technicolor, the shades are so different. And so,
Wow.
yeah, dare to do that.
Wow.
Be bold.
Wow. Amazing. I couldn't close the podcast any better. Thank you so much, Nthabi. I appreciate your time. It's been an exciting conversation. When I go into these episodes, I have an idea of some of the things. Sometimes I try to have an idea of the outcome of the episode, and sometimes I like to be surprised in a very pleasant way. And this is one of those episodes where I'm pleasantly surprised and I'm excited about the conversations that we've had
Thank
so far.
you.
I think it would be a real pleasure to have you back here sometime soon. Obviously not like next week or next month, but sometime sometime in the future for a sequel. I really, really appreciate you. Thank you so much for your time. Are there any final words you'd like to share before I pull or draw the curtains?
No, the only thing I'd love to just say is thank you for creating a platform for these
Hmm.
real,
Wow.
honest, and really heartwarming conversations to take
Wow.
place. Very
Wow.
reflective stuff, very deep
Wow.
work that you're doing,
Wow.
and
Wow.
we need to have more conversations like this.
Wow. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Nthabi. Thank you so much. And with that, guys, thank you very much for joining us on this episode of the Diary of a CMO. I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye bye.
Awesome. Thank you. Bye.